The afternoon sun beat down merciless on Dust Rock, painting the weathered buildings in shades of rust and amber. Wind whipped through the main street, carrying with it the eternal red dust that gave the town its name, settling into every crack and crevice like dried blood. The stagecoach wheezed to a stop in front of the depot, its wheels groaning under the weight of travel and time. Among the handful of passengers who stumbled out into the harsh light was a young woman who seemed utterly out of place. Her wedding dress, once white as desert bones, had faded to the color of old parchment, stained with the dust of 1,000 miles. The hem was torn in places, revealing worn boots that had seen better days. She clutched a small carpet bag to her chest like a shield, her dark eyes scanning the hostile landscape with a mixture of hope and growing dread. Isabella Martinez stood frozen on the wooden platform, watching as the other passengers dispersed into the town or were greeted by waiting relatives. She searched the small crowd for a face she'd never seen, holding tight to the crumpled photograph in her pocket, the only image she had of Thomas Brennan, the man who'd promised her a new life through the matrimonial agency back in St. Louis. "You the Mexican bride?" The station master, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, spat into the dirt near her feet. His eyes traveled over her dress with undisguised contempt. "I am Isabella Martinez," she replied, lifting her chin despite the tremor in her voice. "I am here to meet Mr. Thomas Brennan. He was to collect me today." The man's harsh laugh was like the crack of a whip. "Brennan? That fool's been dead near 3 weeks now. Got himself shot over a card game at the Silver Dollar. Guess nobody thought to write you." The world seemed to tilt beneath Isabella's feet. She gripped the edge of the platform, her knuckles white beneath her brown skin. "Dead?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "As a doornail. You best get yourself back on that stage when it heads out tomorrow. Ain't nothing for you here." He turned away, dismissing her as easily as one might shoo a stray dog. Isabella watched the stagecoach pull away, taking with it her only means of escape. The ticket back would cost money she didn't have. She'd spent everything, sold her mother's silver comb, her father's pocket watch, even taken in washing until her hands were raw, all for the promise of a new life with a man who now lay cold in some unmarked grave. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Isabella wandered down the main street, her wedding dress drawing stares and whispers from the townspeople. Women pulled their children closer. Men leered or looked away. She was a curiosity at best, an unwanted burden at worst. "No rooms for your kind," the hotel clerk informed her, not even bothering to look up from his ledger. The boarding house matron was more direct. "I run a respectable establishment. No unaccompanied foreign women." By the time full dark had fallen, Isabella had been turned away from every doorway in Dust Rock. Her feet ached in her worn boots, and her stomach cramped with hunger. She'd had nothing but water since yesterday morning. The last of her money, 3 coins that wouldn't buy a meal, let alone passage home, clinked mockingly in her pocket. She found herself in an alley between the Mercantile and the Undertaker's, sliding down the rough wooden wall until she sat in the dirt, her once beautiful dress pooling around her like spilled milk. This was how it would end. Then, not in the loving arms of a husband, not in the warmth of a new home, but alone in an alley in a town that didn't want her. The sound of boots on wooden planks made her look up. A man emerged from the sheriff's office across the street, his movements purposeful and sure, even in the dim light from the scattered lanterns. She could see the silver star pinned to his vest catching the moonlight. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made other men step aside. Deputy Sheriff Ethan Cole had just finished his evening rounds, checking that the saloons weren't getting too rowdy, that the painted ladies weren't causing trouble on the main street. It had been a quiet night by Dust Rock standards, only one fight at the Silver Dollar, and that had been settled with fists rather than lead. He was heading home when something caught his eye, a splash of faded white in the alley's darkness. His hand moved instinctively to his Colt as he approached, then relaxed when he saw it was just a woman, the Mexican bride. He realized he'd heard about her arrival, heard too about Brennan's death. He'd figured she'd taken the evening stage out. Isabella scrambled to her feet as he approached, pressing herself against the wall. In her experience, men who found women alone in dark places rarely had good intentions. But something in her snapped. The fear, the hunger, the complete desolation of her situation. She had nothing left to lose. She lurched forward, grabbing his arm with both hands. "Please," she gasped, the English words thick with her accent and desperation. "Please, sir, take me before sunrise. I'll do anything." Ethan stopped short, looking down at the small hands clutching his sleeve. Her fingers were ice cold despite the warm night. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 22 or 23. Her face would have been pretty if not for the wild desperation in her dark eyes, the way fear had carved hollows in her cheeks. "Ma'am," he said carefully, gently trying to disengage her grip. "I think you're confused." "I'm not. I know what I am saying," Isabella interrupted, her voice rising with hysteria. "I have nothing. No money, no family, no place. Tomorrow they will find me dead in this alley or worse. Please, I will cook, clean, anything. Just until sunrise, just so I do not die alone in the dark." She was shaking now, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. Ethan had seen plenty of desperate people in his 5 years wearing the badge. Men who'd lost everything at cards, women whose men had left them behind, children orphaned by violence or disease. But something about this woman, standing there in her ruined wedding dress, begging for nothing more than to survive until dawn, struck him differently. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. The question seemed to surprise her. She blinked, loosening her grip slightly. "Yesterday morning." Ethan cursed under his breath. He looked around the empty street, then back at the woman. He couldn't leave her here. Come morning, she'd either be dead or wishing she was. The vultures in this town would circle soon enough, and a desperate woman with no protection was easy prey. "Come on," he said gruffly, turning toward the sheriff's office. "Let's get you inside." Isabella didn't move. You will help?" "I'm not leaving you in an alley," he said. "That's not help. That's just basic decency. Come on before someone sees and gets the wrong idea." The sheriff's office was small but clean, consisting of 2 rooms in front and 2 cells in back, currently empty. Ethan lit the oil lamp on the desk, casting a warm glow over the sparse furnishings. He gestured to a chair near the potbelly stove. "Sit," he commanded, moving to add wood to the dying embers. "I'll heat up some coffee and beans. It's not much, but it'll fill your stomach." Isabella sank into the chair, watching him with wary eyes. She'd learned to be suspicious of kindness. It usually came with a price. But the warmth from the stove was already seeping into her bones, and the promise of food made her stomach clench painfully. As Ethan worked, heating the coffee and opening a can of beans, she studied him. He was perhaps 35, with the weathered look of a man who'd spent his life under the harsh western sun. His hair was dark, his jaw covered with a day's worth of stubble, but it was his eyes that held her attention, gray like storm clouds, steady and unreadable. "Here," he set a plate and cup before her. "Eat slow or you'll make yourself sick." The beans were barely warm and the coffee bitter, but to Isabella, it might as well have been a feast. She forced herself to eat slowly, aware of his eyes on her. When she finished, she set the plate down carefully, waiting. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "Want to tell me how you ended up in that alley?" So she told him, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, about the matrimonial advertisement, the letters from Thomas Brennan promising her a good life, a real home, about selling everything she had for the passage west, about arriving to find her future had died 3 weeks before in a card game. "I was foolish," she concluded, staring at her hands, "to believe promises from a stranger, to think I could find happiness here." "Brennan was a fool and a drunk," Ethan said bluntly. "You're better off without him, though I know that doesn't help your situation now." Isabella looked up at him. Why are you helping me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "My mother came west as a mail-order bride," he finally said. "Different circumstances, but I remember the stories. How scared she was. How alone. She was lucky. My father was a good man, but I've seen what happens to women who aren't so fortunate." The office fell silent except for the crackling of the stove. Outside, Dust Rock continued its nightly symphony. Distant laughter from the saloons, a dog barking, the wind rattling loose boards. "You can stay here tonight," Ethan said. "There's a cot in the back room where I sometimes catch a few hours during long shifts. Tomorrow we'll figure out something." Isabella's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I meant what I said. I will work. I am not afraid of hard work." "We'll see," Ethan said. "For now, just rest. You're safe here," as he showed her to the small back room with its narrow cot and thin blanket. Isabella caught his sleeve once more. "Why?" she asked again. "Why do you trust me? I could rob you, or—" "With what?" Ethan asked, a slight smile tugging at his mouth. "That bag of yours doesn't look like it holds much worth stealing. Besides," his expression grew serious, "I'm a pretty good judge of character. You're not a thief. You're just someone who took a chance on a better life and got dealt a bad hand. Happens to the best of us out here." He draped his own coat over the thin blanket. "Get some sleep. Things always look better in the morning light." As he turned to go, Isabella's voice stopped him. "I do not even know your name." "Ethan Cole, Deputy Sheriff." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good night, Miss Martinez." "Isabella," she said softly. "My name is Isabella." Ethan nodded and closed the door behind him, leaving Isabella alone in the small room. She sat on the cot, running her fingers over the rough wool of his coat. It smelled of leather and tobacco, of horse and honest sweat. For the first time in days, she felt something other than despair. Outside, she could hear him moving around the office, the scrape of a chair, the rustle of papers. He was staying, she realized, keeping watch, protecting her even though she was nothing to him but a stranger in a ruined dress. Isabella lay down, pulling his coat up to her chin. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears. But tonight, for these few hours until sunrise, she was safe, and in a place like Dust Rock, on the harsh edge of civilization where life was cheap and mercy rare. That was nothing short of a miracle. As she drifted toward sleep, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for Ethan Cole, a man who'd shown kindness to a desperate stranger when it would have been easier to walk away. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of their story, and the dangers that lay ahead would test them both in ways they couldn't imagine. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of the sheriff's office, with a full stomach and a warm blanket, Isabella Martinez allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something better than what she'd come looking for. Not the husband she'd been promised, but something rarer in the unforgiving West. A good man's protection and the possibility of a tomorrow. The morning sun cast long shadows through the sheriff's office windows when Isabella woke, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. Ethan's coat still covered her, and she could hear movement in the front office, the scrape of boots, the clink of metal against metal. She rose quickly, smoothing her ruined dress as best she could and folding the coat carefully. When she emerged from the back room, she found Ethan at the desk, cleaning his revolver with practiced efficiency. A plate of biscuits and a fresh pot of coffee sat nearby. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Help yourself to breakfast." Isabella hesitated, then poured herself coffee with hands that barely trembled. The normalcy of the moment, sharing morning coffee with this stern but kind man, felt surreal after yesterday's desperation. "I should go," she said softly. "I have imposed enough on your kindness." Ethan looked up then, his gray eyes studying her with that same steady intensity. Go where? The question hung between them like a challenge. They both knew she had nowhere, no one, nothing but the clothes on her back and 3 coins that wouldn't buy her a meal. "I will find work," she said, lifting her chin. "I am strong. I can—" "In that dress?" Ethan set down his gun, his expression skeptical. Looking like a runaway bride? Mrs. Henderson won't hire you at the boarding house. She made that clear yesterday. The saloons might take you, but that's not work you want. Isabella's cheeks burned, but she held his gaze. Then I will go to the next town, somewhere they do not know, that you're the Mexican mail-order bride whose husband-to-be died before she arrived? Ethan shook his head. News travels fast out here. Besides, the next town is Silver Creek, 30 miles through desert. You planning to walk? Before Isabella could respond, the door burst open. Sheriff Jim Morrison strode in, a big man with graying whiskers and a disposition that matched his weathered face. He stopped short at seeing Isabella. "Cole," he growled. "What's this?" Ethan stood slowly. The woman from yesterday. Brennan's intended. She had nowhere. I know who she is. Morrison's eyes narrowed. Question is, what's she doing in my office? I gave her shelter for the night, Ethan said evenly. She was in a bad way. Morrison snorted. That's what the church is for, or the cat house, if she's desperate enough. He looked Isabella up and down dismissively. We can't be taking in every stray that wanders into town. She's not a stray. Ethan's voice carried an edge now. She's a woman in trouble through no fault of her own. She's a problem is what she is. Morrison moved to his desk, pointedly ignoring Isabella. Already got folks talking? Mayor's wife saw her wandering around yesterday, causing a disturbance. We don't need that kind of trouble in Dust Rock. Isabella stood abruptly, her pride overcoming her fear. I will go. I do not wish to cause trouble for anyone. Sit down, Ethan said firmly. To Morrison, he added. She wasn't causing any disturbance. She was looking for help, and this town turned its back on her. This town's got no obligation to every fool woman who shows up chasing promises from dead men. Morrison pulled out a flask, taking a long pull despite the early hour. You want to play savior, Cole? Do it on your own time and your own dime. I want her out of here. The two men stared at each other, years of partnership and tension crackling between them. Finally, Ethan reached up and unpinned his deputy's badge, setting it on the desk with a soft click. Then I reckon this is my own time. Morrison's face darkened. Don't be a fool. Boy, you're throwing away a good position for some Mexican girl you don't even know. I'm taking a stand for what's right, Ethan replied. Something you used to understand before the bottle and the mayor's money got hold of you. For a moment, violence threatened. Morrison's hand twitched toward his gun, but Ethan stood calm and ready, his own hand loose at his side. Then Morrison laughed, ugly and bitter. Have it your way, but when she brings trouble, and her kind always does, don't come crying to me. He snatched up Ethan's badge. Clear out your things, both of you. Ethan gathered his few possessions, an extra box of ammunition, a worn Bible, a photograph he slipped into his pocket before Isabella could see it. She watched, stricken with guilt. I am sorry, she whispered. Your job, because of me. I was planning to quit anyway, Ethan said, which might have been true or might have been kindness. Morrison's been in the mayor's pocket for months now, turning blind eyes to things that shouldn't be ignored. This just moved up my timeline. They stepped out into the morning sun, Ethan carrying his meager belongings in a leather satchel. The street was beginning to fill with people starting their day, and conversations stopped as they passed. Isabella felt their stares like physical weight. Where will you go? She asked as they paused at the corner. I've got a small place outside town, nothing fancy, just a cabin and a few acres I've been working when I can. He glanced at her. You could come, just until you figure out your next move. There's honest work needs doing, if you meant what you said about not being afraid of it. Isabella studied his face, searching for the catch. In her experience, men didn't offer help without expecting payment of some kind. But Ethan's expression remained steady, patient. Why? She asked for what felt like the 100th time. This time, he really smiled, a brief, genuine expression that transformed his weathered features. Maybe because I'm tired of watching this town crush decent people. Maybe because my mother raised me to help those who need it. Or maybe, he shrugged, I just don't like bullies. And right now, this whole town's acting like one. They were interrupted by the approach of a well-dressed woman in silk and lace, accompanied by a younger woman who could only be her daughter, Mrs. Mayor Whitman. Isabella recognized from her fruitless search yesterday. Mr. Cole, the woman said coolly, pointedly ignoring Isabella. I heard there was some unpleasantness at the sheriff's office. No unpleasantness, ma'am, just a difference of opinion about basic human decency. Mrs. Whitman's lips pursed. Indeed. Well, I hope you know what you're doing. Certain associations can be quite damaging to one's reputation. Good thing I never cared much for reputation. Ethan replied pleasantly. Good day, Mrs. Whitman. Miss Whitman. As they walked away, Isabella heard the younger woman whisper, Mother, she's wearing a wedding dress. Hush, Charlotte. We don't associate with that kind. The word stung, but Isabella had heard worse. She kept her head high as Ethan led her to the livery stable, where he kept his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Samson. Can you ride? He asked, saddling the horse with efficient movements. A little. She'd learned as a child. Before everything changed. You'll ride, I'll walk alongside. When she started to protest, he held up a hand. The road's rough, and you're already dead on your feet. No arguments. The cabin sat 3 miles outside of town, nestled in a small valley with a creek running behind it. It was simple but well built, with a front porch and real glass windows. A small garden struggled against the harsh climate, and a few chickens pecked in the yard. It's not much, Ethan said, helping her down from the horse. But it's quiet, and it's mine. To Isabella, who'd spent the last months in boarding house rooms and the last night thinking she'd die in an alley, it looked like paradise. It's wonderful, she said honestly. Inside was one main room with a fireplace, a simple kitchen area, and a ladder leading to what must be a loft. Everything was clean, but spare. Clearly a bachelor's dwelling. Ethan gestured around awkwardly. You can have the loft. I'll bed down here. There's plenty of work. The garden needs tending. The chickens need feeding. And I've been meaning to fix the fence before winter. He paused. I can pay a little. Plus room and board. It's honest work, like I promised. Isabella turned to face him fully. Why did you really give up your badge for me? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the harsh landscape beyond. Maybe because I've been looking for a reason to leave for a while now. Watching Morrison sell his soul piece by piece, seeing the town council care more about appearances than justice. Your situation just made it clear. If I couldn't help one woman in need without permission from the mayor's wife, what good was the badge anyway? He moved to the stove, checking the firebox. I'll head back to town for supplies. You should rest. There's water in the barrel, and some jerky in the cupboard if you're hungry. I would like to work, Isabella said firmly. Show me what needs doing. Ethan studied her, this woman in a ruined wedding dress, standing in his simple cabin with her chin raised and determination in her eyes. The chickens first, then they're probably wondering why breakfast is late. He showed her where the feed was kept, introduced her to the small flock. The chickens seemed unimpressed by her dress, caring only about the grain she scattered. It was oddly comforting, their simple needs and cheerful clucking. I'll be back before dark, Ethan said, swinging up onto Samson. Bar the door if anyone comes by. Not everyone in town is as unfriendly as yesterday, but better safe. Isabella watched him ride away, then turned to survey her new domain. It wasn't what she'd dreamed of when she'd answered Thomas Brennan's advertisement. There was no wedding ring, no promises of forever, just a job and a roof and a man who'd given up his position rather than turn her out. She rolled up her sleeves, tucked her dress up out of the dirt, and got to work. The chickens fed. She turned to the garden, pulling weeds and checking the struggling plants. The sun climbed higher, and sweat soaked through her dress. But it felt good to be useful, to earn her keep. When Ethan returned near sunset, He found the garden weeded, the chickens contentedly roosting, and Isabella on the porch, mending a torn feed sack she'd found. "You've been busy," he observed, unloading supplies from his saddlebags. "I like to work," she said simply. "It is, how do you say, good for the soul." He'd brought fabric, simple calico, nothing fancy, along with the other supplies. "Figured you might want something more practical than that dress," he said gruffly, not meeting her eyes. "Mrs. Chen at the general store helped me pick it out." Isabella fingered the fabric, her throat tight with emotion. It was a practical gift, nothing romantic about it, but the thoughtfulness made her eyes burn with unshed tears. "Thank you," she managed. "I will repay you when—" "It's part of your wages," he interrupted. "Can't have my hired help working in a wedding dress. Scares the chickens." That surprised a laugh out of her, her first in days. Ethan smiled in response, and for a moment, the cabin felt less like a refuge and more like something that might, possibly, become a home. As they prepared a simple supper together, working side by side in the small kitchen, Isabella allowed herself to think that maybe her desperate plea in the alley had been heard by someone after all. Not in the way she'd expected, not with the outcome she'd imagined, but perhaps with exactly what she needed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She had no illusions about that. The town's hostility wouldn't disappear, and there would be those who questioned Ethan's decision to help her. But tonight, in this simple cabin with this complicated, kind man, she was safe. She was valued. She was, against all odds, home. The evening settled around the cabin like a comfortable blanket. After supper, they sat on the porch, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Isabella had changed into one of the simple dresses Ethan had brought, brown calico that fit reasonably well, and her wedding dress hung on the line, a ghost of her former dreams. "You never asked," she said quietly, breaking the companionable silence. "About where I come from. About my family." Ethan leaned back against the porch post, his coffee cup balanced on his knee. "Figured you'd tell me when you were ready. Or not. Some stories are meant to be kept." But Isabella found, surprisingly, that she wanted to tell him. Maybe it was the kindness he'd shown, or the way he'd stood up to his own boss for her. Maybe it was just the need to have someone know who she really was, not just the desperate mail-order bride. "My family had a small ranch," she began, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. "Nothing grand, just enough land for some cattle, a few horses. My father, Miguel Martinez, he came from Mexico as a young man. He worked hard, saved every penny, finally bought that piece of land. He met my mother at a church social. Maria, her name was—" She paused, lost in memory. "I had 2 brothers. Carlos was older. He wanted to be a vaquero. Used to practice with his lasso on the fence posts. Little Miguel, we called him Miguelito. He was only 12. He loved to read. Papa would trade cattle for books, just to see him smile." Ethan remained silent, letting her speak at her own pace. The crickets had begun their evening chorus, and, somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "It was a Tuesday," Isabella continued, her hands clasped tight in her lap. "I remember because Mama was making fresh tortillas. It was Miguelito's favorite day. The riders came just after noon. 6 men wearing masks. They wanted money, but we were not rich. When Papa told them this—" Her voice broke slightly. Ethan shifted, not touching her but moving closer, a solid presence in the darkness. "They shot Papa first. He was trying to protect Mama. Carlos, he grabbed Papa's rifle, but he was no match for 6 men. They enjoyed it, taking their time, making us watch." Her words came faster now, as if she needed to get them out before courage failed. "Mama tried to shield Miguelito, but they showed no mercy, not even for a child who only wanted to read his books." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of her loss. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice rough. "How did you survive?" "The root cellar. Mama had sent me for preserves when the riders came. I heard the shots, the screams. I hid beneath the floorboards, in a space Papa had dug for storing vegetables. I stayed there, even after the shooting stopped, even after I heard them tearing through our house, taking what little we had. She drew a shaky breath. I stayed hidden until dark. When I finally came out, they were all dead. My whole family, gone in an afternoon. I buried them myself. Took me 3 days. No one from town would help. They were too afraid the raiders might return. These men, Ethan said carefully. Did you see them? Would you recognize them? Isabella nodded slowly. The leader removed his mask at the end. I saw through a crack in the floorboards. A Mexican man with a scar across his left eye. He laughed as he set fire to our barn. Laughed like it was all a grand joke. What was his name? I heard one of the others call him Rojas. Just Rojas. She shivered despite the warm evening. I left that night, walked to the nearest town. Sold Mama's wedding ring for coach fare. I could not stay. Every shadow looked like riders. Every stranger's face might hide a killer. When I saw the advertisement for mail-order brides, it seemed like Providence, a chance to go far away, to start fresh where no one knew my tragedy. And instead, you found more hardship. Ethan observed. Isabella surprised them both by laughing, a short, bitter sound. Perhaps I am cursed. Everything I touch turns to ash. Don't say that. Ethan's voice was firm. What happened to your family? What happened with Brennan? None of that was your fault. Evil men do evil things. That's on them, not you. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in thought. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the desert landscape. Finally, Isabella spoke again. So quietly, Ethan had to lean in to hear. Sometimes I dream I am still in that cellar. I wake thinking I smell smoke, hear horses, hear my mother's last cry. I wonder if I am a coward for hiding, for living when they died. You're no coward, Ethan said firmly. You survived. You traveled hundreds of miles alone to start a new life. You faced down a hostile town with nothing but pride and determination. That takes courage most men don't have. Isabella looked at him in the moonlight, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time, not just as a rescuer, but as a man who understood loss, who knew the weight of carrying on when everything seemed hopeless. You speak as one who knows, she said softly. Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my wife died 6 years ago. Fever took her, along with the baby she was carrying. I was out hunting rustlers. Gone 3 days. By the time I got back, she was already in the ground. The doc said there was nothing anyone could have done, but he shrugged, the gesture carrying years of guilt. What was her name? Sarah Elizabeth Cole. He pulled something from his pocket, the photograph Isabella had glimpsed him taking from the sheriff's office. Even in the dim light, she could see it was a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She was beautiful. She was. Ethan agreed. Too good for a rough lawman, but she chose me anyway. After she died, I threw myself into the job. Easier to chase outlaws than face an empty house. This cabin, he gestured around them. I bought it last year. Thought maybe it was time to stop running. But I kept the deputy job, kept finding reasons not to really live here. And now? Now I've got chickens that need feeding and a garden that needs tending and a helper who works harder than any hand I could hire. He gave her a slight smile. Maybe it's time to stop just existing and start living again. Isabella felt something shift between them, subtle but significant. Two damaged souls recognizing kindred pain, finding unexpected comfort in shared understanding. I dream sometimes that they are still alive, she admitted. That I will wake and Mama will be making breakfast. Papa will be checking the cattle. My brothers will be arguing about who has to muck the stalls. Then I open my eyes and remember I am alone. You're not alone now, Ethan said simply. The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. Isabella felt tears slip down her cheeks, the first she'd allowed herself since digging those graves. I do not even have their photographs, she whispered. nothing to remember them by except memories that hurt to hold. Ethan stood abruptly and went inside. Isabella heard him rummaging around. Then he returned with paper and a pencil. "Tell me what they looked like," he said, sitting back down. "I'm no artist, but I can write it down. Every detail you remember. Their smiles, their habits, the way your mother sang while she cooked. We'll save it all." For the next hour, Isabella talked while Ethan wrote. She described her father's calloused hands and booming laugh, her mother's gentle ways and fierce love, Carlos's swagger and dreams, Miguelito's serious expression when reading. She shared stories, the time Carlos tried to ride an unbroken horse and ended up in the water trough, how Miguelito would read to the cattle because he insisted it made them grow fatter, the way her parents would dance in the kitchen when they thought the children weren't watching. With each memory shared, the weight on her chest seemed to lighten just a fraction. Ethan wrote it all down in his careful script, asking questions that drew out more details, more precious moments saved from the ashes of tragedy. "There," he said finally, handing her the pages. "Now they're not just in your memory. They're here, written down. Real." Isabella clutched the papers like treasure, fresh tears flowing. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you for letting them live again, even just in words. Everyone deserves to be remembered," Ethan said quietly, "especially by those who loved them." They sat together as the night deepened. Two people who had known profound loss finding unexpected solace in shared grief and gentle understanding. The desert stretched endlessly around them, harsh and unforgiving. But here on this simple porch, they had created a small space of peace. "Tomorrow, I'll teach you to shoot," Ethan said eventually. "A woman alone should know how to protect herself." Isabella nodded, understanding the practical necessity, even as she hated the thought of touching a weapon. "I do not wish to be helpless again." "You were never helpless," he corrected. "You were one person against 6 armed men. No amount of courage changes those odds. But knowledge is power, and I aim to give you as much as I can." As they finally retired, Isabella to the loft, Ethan to his bedroll by the fireplace, she paused at the latter. "Ethan, do you believe they are at peace, my family?" He considered the question seriously. "I believe love doesn't die with the body. Your family knows you survived, knows you're building a new life. That would bring any parent peace." Isabella nodded, comforted by his certainty. As she lay in the narrow loft bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the cabin settling, she held the pages of memories against her chest. For the first time since that terrible Tuesday, she had spoken their names aloud to someone who listened without judgment, who understood the crushing weight of survivor's guilt. She thought about Ethan downstairs, this man who had upended his life for a stranger, who carried his own ghosts with quiet dignity. Perhaps they were both broken, carrying wounds that would never fully heal. But broken things could still be useful, could still find purpose and even beauty in their imperfect forms. As sleep finally claimed her, Isabella's last thought was that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't found Thomas Brennan because she was meant to find Ethan Cole instead. Not for romance, her heart was too raw for such thoughts, but for this, understanding, protection, and the first fragile hope that life after devastating loss was possible. The desert wind whispered around the cabin, carrying the scent of sage and creosote, and for the first time in months, Isabella Martinez slept without nightmares. 2 weeks passed in relative peace. Isabella had settled into the rhythm of life at the cabin, rising with the sun to tend the chickens, working the garden through the morning, preparing simple meals, mending clothes and fences with equal determination. Ethan had kept his promise, teaching her to shoot with an old Colt revolver, patiently correcting her stance and grip until she could hit a tin can at 20 paces. It was during one of these lessons that they saw the rider approaching, a lone figure moving fast across the desert, dust billowing behind his horse. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to his gun as he stepped in front of Isabella. "Get inside," he said quietly, but Isabella remained at his shoulder, squinting against the afternoon sun. There was something about the way the rider moved, a recklessness that spoke of urgency rather than threat. As he drew closer, they could see he was young, barely out of his teens, his horse lathered with sweat. "Mr. Cole!" the boy called out, reining up hard. "Mr. Cole, you gotta come quick!" Ethan relaxed slightly, recognizing Tommy Chen from the general store. "What's wrong, son?" "There's strangers in town," Tommy gasped, trying to catch his breath. "Mexican riders, 5 of them. They're asking about—" His eyes flicked to Isabella, then away. "They're asking about a woman," described her real particular-like. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. Her hand found Ethan's arm, gripping tight. "What did these men look like?" she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "The leader, he's got a scar." Tommy traced a line across his eye. "Mean-looking fellow. They say they're looking for someone who stole from them, but Mr. Cole, the way they're acting, it ain't about money." "Rojas," Isabella whispered, the name like poison on her tongue. Ethan's expression hardened. "Where are they now?" "Silver Dollar Saloon. Last I saw. Sheriff Morrison told them he didn't know nothing, but—" Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "But Mrs. Whitman, she mentioned seeing a Mexican woman in a wedding dress couple weeks back, said she left town with you." Ethan cursed under his breath. "How long ago?" "Maybe an hour. Pa sent me soon as he heard what they were asking. He said you should know, on account of you helping folks and all. Tell your PA I'm grateful." Ethan was already moving, checking his weapons with practiced efficiency. "You head straight home. Tommy, stay off the main streets." The boy nodded and wheeled his horse around, racing back toward town. Isabella stood frozen, her worst nightmare suddenly made real in the harsh light of day. "They found me," she said, her voice hollow. "I brought this to your door. I should go. Lead them away." "You'll do no such thing." Ethan's voice was firm as granite. "Pack what you need. We're leaving. Where can we go? They will follow. They always follow." The hysteria she'd kept at bay for weeks threatened to overwhelm her. "You do not understand. Rojas, he is like a rabid dog. He never lets go once he has a scent." Ethan gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Isabella, look at me. I've dealt with men like Rojas before. They're tough when they're hunting scared prey. But I'm not scared, and you're not prey. Not anymore. He killed my family," she whispered. "He will kill you too. He can try." There was something cold and dangerous in Ethan's smile. "Get your things. We need to move fast." They packed quickly. Ammunition, food, water, bedrolls. Isabella wore the practical dress and boots Ethan had bought her, her hair braided and pinned up tight. She looked nothing like the desperate bride who'd stumbled into Dust Rock, but she knew Rojas would recognize her anyway. Evil had a way of remembering its victims. Ethan led them not toward town, but into the Badlands to the west, where red rocks rose like ancient sentinels and narrow canyons offered protection and peril in equal measure. "There's an old mining camp about 10 miles in," he explained as they rode, Isabella clinging to his waist on Samson's back. "Abandoned now, but defensible. We'll hole up there tonight, figure out our next move." "There is no next move," Isabella said against his shoulder. "He will never stop hunting me. I saw his face. I know what he did. I'm a loose end he cannot afford." "Then we'll cut the thread." Ethan replied grimly. "One way or another, this ends." They pushed hard through the afternoon, following trails barely visible to anyone who hadn't spent years learning the desert's secrets. As the sun began its descent, painting the rocks in shades of blood and fire, they reached the abandoned camp, a cluster of wooden buildings clinging to a canyon wall, their boards weathered silver by time and neglect. Ethan dismounted first, rifle in hand, checking each building before allowing Isabella to follow. The place had an eerie stillness, as if holding its breath for the violence it sensed coming. "Main building solid," he reported. "Good sight lines. Only one way in unless they want to climb down from above. We'll ford up there." As they settled in, barricading the door and checking weapons, Isabella watched Ethan work with grim efficiency, This was not the gentleman who'd taught her to gather eggs or helped her plant beans. This was the lawman, the hunter of dangerous men. And she realized that perhaps Rojas wasn't the only killer in the desert tonight. "Tell me about Rojas," Ethan said as darkness fell. "Everything you know, his men, his habits, his weaknesses." So Isabella told him what she'd observed from her hiding place and what she'd learned in the months since. Fragments gathered from overheard conversations, newspaper accounts of raids, the pattern of violence that followed Rojas like a shadow. "He is cruel but not stupid," she concluded. "He likes to play with his victims, to make them afraid before the end. It is not enough to kill. He must break the spirit first." "Men like that always have a weakness," Ethan mused. "They get overconfident, think they're invincible." He checked his guns again, a ritual that seemed to calm him. "How many did Tommy say?" "5. 5 in town, but Rojas usually travels with more. The others could be watching the roads, making sure no one leaves." She shuddered at the thought. "He is thorough. So am I." They ate cold biscuits and dried meat, neither having appetite but knowing they'd need strength for whatever came next. Outside, the desert came alive with night sounds. The yip of coyotes, the whisper of wind through stone, the occasional skitter of small creatures. "I'm sorry," Isabella said suddenly, "for bringing this to you. You gave me kindness, and I repaid it with danger." "You didn't bring anything," Ethan corrected. "Rojas brought it. Men like him, they're a plague on this land. If it wasn't you, it'd be someone else he was terrorizing." He paused, then added more softly, "Besides, I'd rather face him with warning than have him show up unexpected. You could have turned me away. When Tommy came, you could have sent me out alone." Ethan looked at her across the dim lamplight, his expression unreadable. "No," he said simply, "I couldn't have." They kept watch in shifts, though neither truly slept. Isabella dozed fitfully, starting at every sound, while Ethan remained alert, a shadow by the window. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in pale rose and gold, he touched her shoulder gently. "Riders coming?" Isabella joined him at the window, peering through the gap in the boards. Her heart sank. Not 5 riders, but 8, moving slowly up the canyon like wolves on a scent. Even at distance, she recognized Rojas in the lead, the way he sat his horse, the arrogant tilt of his head. "He brought more men," she whispered. "Good," Ethan said, checking his rifle. "Means he's worried. Scared men make mistakes. You are mad. 8 against 2 who know they're coming," he corrected. "Who have cover and high ground. I've faced worse odds." As the riders drew closer, Rojas's voice carried on the morning air. "Señorita Martinez, I know you are here. Come out, and I promise to make it quick. Your friend too, if he is smart, but if you make me come in there." He laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Well, you remember what happened to your family when they made me work for it?" Isabella's hands shook as she gripped the revolver Ethan had given her. Rage and terror warred in her chest. Rage at this monster who'd destroyed everything she loved. Terror that he would do it again. "Steady," Ethan murmured. "He's trying to rattle you. Don't give him the satisfaction." "Isabella," Rojas called again. "Such a pretty thing, hiding under the floorboards like a little mouse. Did you think you could run forever? Did you think I would not find you?" His voice turned harder. "You saw my face. You know this cannot stand, but I am merciful. Surrender now, and I will not make you watch your protector die slowly." Ethan had heard enough. He shifted position, sighting down his rifle barrel. "That's close enough. Rojas," he called out. "This is Ethan Cole speaking, former deputy of Dust Rock, and currently the man standing between you and the lady. Turn around now, and you might live to see another sunrise." Laughter rippled through the group of riders. "One man," Rojas mocked. "You would die for a woman you barely know?" "I'd kill for one," Ethan replied calmly. "Especially when she's under my protection. Last warning, right away." "Or what? Lawman, you'll arrest us?" More laughter from the bandits. "No," Ethan said, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the canyon like thunder. Rojas's hat flew off his head. A neat hole punched through the crown. The laughter died instantly. "Next one goes between your eyes." Ethan called, "Your move, Rojas!" For a moment, the morning hung suspended. 8 killers facing a fortified position. Calculating odds. Measuring courage against greed. Isabella held her breath, knowing that the next seconds would determine whether she lived or died. Then Rojas smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "So be it, lawman. You have chosen death." He raised his hand, and his men spread out, preparing to charge. "Kill them both, but the woman, bring her to me alive. She and I have unfinished business." As the riders spurred their horses forward, Ethan glanced at Isabella. "Remember what I taught you? Aim careful, squeeze, don't pull, and whatever happens, don't let them take you alive." She nodded, raising her gun with hands that had steadied now that the moment was upon them. "For my family," she whispered. "For justice." Ethan agreed, and opened fire. The battle for the mining camp had begun, and the desert would soon drink deep of blood beneath the rising sun. The gunfire in the canyon faded to echoes, then silence. Ethan had held them off, his rifle singing death until Rojas and his remaining men retreated into the rocks. 3 bodies lay in the dust, but 5 killers still lived, and Isabella was gone. It had happened so fast. During the firefight, while Ethan was pinned down by rifle fire, 2 men had circled around. They'd grabbed Isabella from the back room, her scream cut short by a cruel hand. By the time Ethan fought his way to the door, all he could see was dust and the vanishing forms of riders heading deeper into the Badlands. Now he stood in the ruined doorway, blood seeping from a graze on his arm, watching the sun climb higher into a merciless sky. Every instinct screamed at him to give chase immediately, but charging blind after 5 armed men in their chosen territory was suicide. He needed to be smart. Isabella's life depended on it. Ethan quickly gathered supplies, ammunition, water, dried meat. He studied the ground where they'd taken her, noting the depth of hoofprints, the direction. Rojas was heading for Devil's Canyon, a maze of red rock where a man could disappear forever, or where he could torture a woman at leisure, with no one to hear her screams. "Not today," Ethan growled, swinging into Samson's saddle. "Not her." The trail was easy enough to follow at first. 5 horses moving fast left plenty of sign. But as the land rose and twisted, becoming a labyrinth of stone and shadow, the tracks grew harder to read. Ethan dismounted frequently, studying disturbed pebbles, broken twigs on the scarce brush, the pattern of dust on rock. 3 hours into the chase, he found the first marker Isabella had left, a scrap of fabric from her dress, caught deliberately on a thorny bush. Smart girl. She was leaving him a trail. The sun reached its zenith, brutal and unforgiving. Sweat soaked through Ethan's shirt, and Samson's coat darkened with moisture, but he pushed on. Following the ghost of a trail and the periodic signs, Isabella managed to leave, a hairpin glinting in the dust, scratches on soft sandstone that could only be deliberate. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, he heard it, rough laughter echoing off canyon walls. Ethan dismounted, tying Samson in a shaded cleft, and moved forward on foot. Years of hunting outlaws had taught him patience. Silence. He became another shadow among many, easing between boulders until he could see into the canyon below. They'd made camp in a natural bowl of stone, probably thinking themselves safe. A small fire crackled despite the heat, and the 5 remaining outlaws lounged around it, passing a bottle. Isabella sat apart, her hands bound, her face turned away from her captors. Even from distance, Ethan could see the bruise darkening her cheek. Rojas paced in front of her like a caged predator. "You cost me 3 good men," he was saying. "Martinez, Gonzalez, Tucker, all dead because of you." "Good," Isabella spat, and earned a backhand that snapped her head to the side. "Still fierce, little mouse?" Rojas grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "That will change. You see, I was going to kill you quick. A bullet, like your papa. But now," he smiled coldly, "now we will take our time. Let you understand the price of running." Ethan studied the layout, 5 men spread out. No clear shot at all of them from any position. If he started shooting, they'd use Isabella as a shield or kill her outright. He needed them separated, distracted. But how? The answer came from Isabella herself. As one of the outlaws approached her with water, she suddenly convulsed, gasping and clutching at her chest. "My heart!" she cried out in Spanish. "Please, the medicine in my bag!" It was a convincing performance. 2 men rushed to check on her while Rojas shouted orders. In the confusion, Ethan saw his chance. He shifted position, lining up his shot. The rifle cracked once. The outlaw furthest from Isabella, a thick-set man with a gray beard, pitched forward into the fire. Before the others could react, Ethan had moved, already finding new cover as bullets whined off the rocks where he'd been. "The lawman!" one of them shouted. "He followed us." "Of course he did." Rojas snarled. "Spread out! Find him!" 2 men scrambled for the rocks, seeking height and cover. That left 2 with Isabella, Rojas, and a younger man who looked nervous, his gun hand shaking. Ethan smiled grimly. Nervous men made mistakes. He let the hunters pass his position, then struck. His knife was silent, and the first man died without a sound. The second heard something, started to turn, but Ethan's gun butt caught him in the temple. He dropped like a stone. 3 down, 2 to go. Ethan worked his way higher, finding a position overlooking the camp. Rojas had dragged Isabella behind a boulder, using her as cover while he searched the rim. The younger outlaw crouched nearby, sweating profusely. "Cole!" Rojas shouted. "I know you can hear me. You want the woman? Come down and face me like a man." Ethan considered his options. He could wait, hope for a clear shot. But every minute increased the chance Rojas would decide Isabella was more trouble than she was worth. Sometimes the direct approach was best. "Send out your man," Ethan called back. "Make it a fair fight and I'll come down." Rojas laughed. "You think me a fool? I think you're a coward who murders families and hides behind women." Ethan replied, "Prove me wrong." The insult hit home. Rojas's face darkened with rage. He barked something at the younger outlaw, who looked terrified but began climbing toward Ethan's general position. The kid never had a chance. He was brave enough, but bravery without skill just made you dead faster. Ethan waited until he was close, then rose from cover. The younger man's shot went wide. Ethan's didn't. Now it was just Rojas and Isabella in the camp below. 1-on-1. If you didn't count the knife Rojas held to Isabella's throat. "Impressive. Lawman," Rojas called. "But now what? You shoot. She dies. You come down. You both die. Seems we have a problem." Ethan began descending slowly, rifle held loose but ready. "Let her go. Rojas, your fight's with me now." "No, my fight was with her family. They thought they could refuse me, thought their pride was worth more than their lives. I showed them otherwise." He pressed the knife harder against Isabella's skin, drawing a thin line of blood. "Just as I'll show you." Ethan reached the canyon floor, stopping 30 feet from where Rojas held Isabella. He could see her eyes, terrified but also trusting, believing somehow he would save her. "You know what your problem is, Rojas?" Ethan said conversationally, not looking at Isabella but reading her body language. She was gathering herself, preparing. Smart girl. "You talk too much." Isabella moved. She'd been working at her bonds while Rojas ranted, and now she twisted violently, driving her elbow into his ribs. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The knife wavered from her throat for just an instant. Ethan's draw was lightning fast, years of practice distilled into one fluid motion. Rojas was quick too, trying to bring his gun around, but he was a heartbeat too slow. The shots came almost together. Ethan felt the bullet burn past his cheek, but his aim was true. Rojas staggered back, a red flower blooming on his chest. He looked down at it in surprise, then up at Ethan. You shot me," he said, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "You killed her family," Ethan replied coldly. "You terrorized her. You threatened her life. What did you expect? Mercy?" Rojas fell to his knees, blood frothing on his lips. He looked at Isabella, who had scrambled away from him. "Little mouse," he gasped, and then pitched forward into the dust. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Isabella let out a sob. Relief, grief, release all mingled together. Ethan crossed to her quickly, cutting her bonds with the same knife that had saved his life earlier. "It's over," he said gently. "He's dead. They're all dead. You're safe." She collapsed against him, shaking. "You came for me. I knew you would come. Always," he said simply, holding her as the shaking turned to tears. "I'll always come for you." They stayed like that as shadows lengthened in the canyon, surrounded by the dead but focused only on life, on breath and heartbeat and the miracle of survival. Finally, as the sun touched the canyon rim, Isabella pulled back to look at him. "Your face," she said, touching the graze on his cheek where Rojas's bullet had passed. "It's nothing. You're hurt worse." He examined the cut on her throat, shallow, thankfully, and the bruises that marked her face. "Can you ride?" She nodded, then looked down at Rojas's body. "Is it wrong that I feel nothing? No satisfaction, no relief, just empty." "Killing never fills the holes left by loss," Ethan said quietly. "But now you can heal without looking over your shoulder. That's worth something." He helped her to her feet, keeping an arm around her as they made their way back to where he'd left Samson. The horse nickered softly, seemingly glad to see them both alive. As they prepared to leave this canyon of death, Isabella caught Ethan's arm. "What you did, risking everything, facing them alone. Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd survived so much, who trusted him when she had no reason to trust anyone. "Because you're under my protection," he said. "And because—" he paused, searching for words. "Because I've lost enough good people to bad men. I wasn't going to lose you too." She reached up, touched his face gently. "Ethan Cole," she said softly. "My guardian, my warrior." "Just a man who keeps his promises," he corrected, but he covered her hand with his own. They rode out of Devil's Canyon as the first stars appeared, Isabella in the saddle and Ethan walking beside, leading Samson carefully through the gathering darkness. Behind them lay violence and death, the final chapter of a tragedy that had begun with her family's murder. But ahead lay something else. Hope, perhaps. Healing. Certainly. And though neither spoke it aloud, both felt the truth settling between them like a blessing. They had faced the worst the world could offer and survived it together. The desert night embraced them, and for the first time since that terrible Tuesday when her world ended, Isabella Martinez felt truly, completely safe. The desert stretched endless beneath a canopy of stars as they made their way back through the Badlands. Ethan had collected horses from the dead outlaws, leading them in a string behind Samson. Isabella rode in silence, her body swaying with exhaustion and delayed shock. Every few minutes, Ethan would glance back to ensure she was still upright in the saddle. They couldn't make it back to the cabin, not in the dark, not with Isabella barely conscious. As the moon rose, Ethan spotted what he'd been looking for, a shallow cave carved by wind and ancient water into the base of a red cliff. It wasn't much, but it would shelter them for the night. "We'll stop here," he said, helping Isabella down from the horse. She leaned heavily against him, her legs barely supporting her weight. "I can go on," she protested weakly. "No need. Rest now. Home tomorrow." He settled her against the smooth stone wall while he unsaddled the horses and gathered dry brush for a fire. The night had turned cold, as desert nights do, and Isabella was shivering despite the blanket he'd wrapped around her. Soon, a small fire crackled at the cave mouth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Ethan heated water for coffee and to clean their wounds properly. The cut on Isabella's throat was shallow but ugly, and bruises had bloomed across her face and arms where rough hands had grabbed her. "This might sting," he warned, dabbing at the cut with a cloth soaked in whiskey from his flask. She hissed at the burn but didn't pull away. "I have felt worse," she said simply. As he worked, she watched his face in the firelight, The graze on his cheek had stopped bleeding, but it would scar, another mark added to the collection that mapped his dangerous life. His hands were gentle despite their strength, treating her injuries with the same careful attention he'd shown teaching her to shoot. "There," he said finally, sitting back. "That should heal clean." They sat in comfortable silence, sharing coffee and cold biscuits. The fire pushed back the darkness, creating a small circle of warmth and safety. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the vast emptiness. "I thought he would win," Isabella said suddenly. "When they took me, when he had the knife at my throat, I thought my story would end there, in violence and fear, just like my family's. But it didn't," Ethan reminded her gently. "Because of you." She turned to face him fully. "You came after me, one man against 5 killers. You could have died. So could you. Difference is, I knew what I was riding into. You were taken against your will." Isabella shook her head. "That is not what I mean. You had no obligation to me. I work for you, yes, but that does not require dying for me. So I ask again, why?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Maybe because I'm tired of losing people," he said finally. "My wife, the baby we never got to meet. I couldn't save them, but you were right there. In danger I could do something about. I couldn't just let it happen again." "I am not her," Isabella said softly. "You're Sarah." "No," he agreed. "You're not. You're Isabella Martinez, who survived watching her family die, who traveled hundreds of miles on hope alone, who left me a trail to follow even when terrified for her life." He looked at her then, something shifting in his gray eyes. "You're yourself, and that's more than enough." The air between them changed, charged with something neither had allowed themselves to acknowledge before. Isabella reached out, her fingers brushing the wound on his cheek. "You are hurt because of me," she whispered. "I'm alive because of you," he corrected. "That move you pulled with Rojas, creating a distraction that saved us both. We saved each other," she said, and didn't pull her hand away. Ethan covered her hand with his own, holding it against his face. "Isabella." "I know," she said quickly. "I know it is too soon, too strange. We have known each other only weeks. I came here to marry another man. You still grieve your wife. There are 1,000 reasons why this is foolish." "And yet," Ethan said roughly. "And yet," she agreed, leaning closer. The kiss was gentle, tentative. Two wounded souls reaching for comfort and finding something unexpected. Isabella tasted coffee and determination, felt the rasp of stubble against her palm. Ethan's hand came up to cradle her face with infinite care, mindful of her bruises. When they pulled apart, both were breathing unsteadily. Isabella's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I am frightened," she admitted. "Not of you, of feeling again, of hoping. Everyone I have loved has been taken from me." "Then we'll be frightened together," Ethan said simply. "I'm not going anywhere. Isabella, not unless you send me away." She laughed softly, a broken sound. "Send away the man who fought 8 killers for me, who gave up his position to shelter me. I may be frightened, but I am not foolish." They talked through the night, sharing stories by the dying fire. Isabella told him about happier times, her mother's recipe for mole that took all day to prepare, her father's terrible singing voice that he inflicted on the cattle every morning, how Carlos had carved her a wooden doll for her 5th birthday, and Miguelito had written it elaborate adventures. Ethan shared his own memories, meeting Sarah at a church social, how she'd made him dance despite his protests that lawmen didn't dance, the way she'd sung while hanging laundry, the plans they'd made for children who would never be. "She would have liked you," he said quietly. "Sarah always said I needed someone who wouldn't let me brood, who'd challenge me. She was right, as usual. You think she would approve of this?" Isabella gestured between them. "I think she'd be furious if she knew I'd spent 6 years alone, punishing myself for something that wasn't my fault." He smiled sadly. She was fierce about people being happy. Said life was too short and too hard to waste on being miserable. As dawn painted the sky in soft pastels, they prepared to leave their shelter. The horses were rested, and home was only a few hours away. But something had fundamentally changed in that cave. A recognition, a possibility. A door carefully opened. Ethan helped Isabella mount, his hands lingering at her waist. "When we get back, things will be different," he said. "The town will know what happened. There'll be questions, probably trouble from Morrison." "Let them come," Isabella said with newfound steel in her voice. "I have faced worse than gossips and corrupt sheriffs." They were perhaps an hour from the cabin when they saw the smoke, a black column rising into the morning sky. Ethan cursed and spurred Samson faster, Isabella clinging tight behind him. The cabin was still standing, but barely. The garden was trampled, the chicken coop smashed, and someone had tried to set fire to the porch before apparently being interrupted. Sheriff Morrison stood in the yard with 2 deputies, turning as they rode up. "Cole," Morrison said, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. "Heard you had some trouble with Mexican bandits. Terrible thing. Course, when you harbor criminals, you got to expect Isabella Martinez is no criminal." Ethan cut him off, dismounting smoothly. "And you know it. Know what I know. Dead men all over Devil's Canyon. You leave town with 1 woman, come back with horses belonging to Mexican nationals. Looks like robbery and murder to me. Those men were wanted in 3 territories," Ethan said evenly. "Rojas and his gang. Check the wanted posters if you doubt me." Morrison's smirk faltered slightly. He obviously hadn't expected them to be known outlaws. Still, the woman was involved. The woman was kidnapped by the men who murdered her family. Ethan's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "I tracked them down and rescued her. Any court in the territory will see it as justified." Maybe. Maybe not. Morrison studied Isabella, who had dismounted and stood straight despite exhaustion. "Either way, she's not welcome in my town. Neither are you, for that matter. You've got 1 day to clear out, or I'll arrest you both for disturbing the peace." "On whose authority?" Ethan demanded. "Mayor Whitman's town council met this morning. Decision was unanimous." Morrison's smile was ugly. "You chose your side. Cole, now live with it." After Morrison and his men left, Ethan surveyed the damage to his property. It was mostly superficial, meant to intimidate rather than destroy. But the message was clear. They were no longer welcome in the shadow of Dust Rock. "I am sorry," Isabella said quietly. "You're home. Because of me." "Stop," Ethan said firmly. "This isn't because of you. It's because small men with small minds can't stand seeing someone different succeed." He looked around the damaged yard. "Besides, I was getting tired of this place anyway. Too close to town, too many memories." "Where will we go?" Ethan considered. "North, maybe. Colorado territory. I hear there's good land opening up, towns that need lawmen who actually uphold the law. Fresh start for both of us." "Together?" Isabella asked, vulnerability in her voice. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "If you'll have me, I know it's not what you planned." "My plans brought me nothing but sorrow," she interrupted. "Perhaps it is time to stop planning and start living." Standing in the ruins of his garden, with his home defaced and his former life crumbling, Ethan Cole looked at Isabella Martinez and saw not disaster, but possibility. She was bruised and exhausted, her dress torn and stained with travel. But her eyes held hope for the first time since he'd met her. "Then we'd better start packing," he said. "Colorado's a long ride, and I want to put distance between us and this place before Morrison changes his mind about that one day." They worked together through the morning, salvaging what they could, preparing for a journey neither had expected but both now embraced. The cabin that had been a refuge became merely a way station, and the future, uncertain but theirs to shape, called from beyond the horizon. As the sun climbed toward noon, Isabella paused in her packing to watch Ethan boarding up the broken windows. He moved with purpose, already looking forward rather than back. She thought of the frightened woman in the wedding dress who'd begged for rescue in an alley, and marveled at how much had changed. "Ready?" Ethan asked. loading the last of their supplies onto the pack horses. Isabella took a final look at the cabin where she'd found safety, where she'd learned to shoot, where she'd shared her story with a man who listened without judgment. Then she turned to face the open trail. "Ready," she said, and meant it. They had been riding for 3 days when the storm caught them. The sky, which had been threatening since morning, finally split open with a vengeance, sending sheets of rain across the high plains. Lightning cracked like God's own whip, and thunder rolled across the grasslands in waves that spooked the horses. Ethan spotted the cave first, a dark mouth in a limestone cliff, half hidden by a tumble of boulders. They rushed inside just as the rain became a solid wall of water, their clothes already soaked through. "We'll wait it out here," Ethan said, leading the horses deeper into the cave where the floor was dry. It was larger than their shelter in the Badlands, with a high ceiling that disappeared into darkness. Isabella shivered, her wet dress clinging uncomfortably. While Ethan tended the horses, she explored deeper, finding a cache of dry wood left by previous travelers. Soon, she had a fire crackling, its warmth pushing back the damp chill. "You're getting good at that," Ethan observed, adding larger branches to build the blaze. "I had a good teacher," she replied, then sneezed violently. Ethan frowned at the sound. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." He rummaged in their packs, producing a dry shirt and blanket. "Here, I'll turn around." Isabella hesitated, then practicality won over modesty. She changed quickly behind the blanket, hanging her sodden dress near the fire to dry. Ethan's shirt fell to her knees, and wrapped in the blanket, she felt almost warm again. "Better?" he asked, still carefully keeping his back turned. "Yes, you can look now." When he turned, she added, "You are also soaked through." "I'm fine," he began, then sneezed himself. "Stubborn man," Isabella muttered, finding another dry shirt and throwing it at him. "Change. I will not have you dying of lung fever because of foolish pride." They settled by the fire as the storm raged outside, sharing dried meat and the last of their coffee. The cave felt like a world apart, safe, warm, removed from all the dangers and judgments that waited beyond its walls. "Tell me about Colorado," Isabella said, drawing her knees up under the blanket. "What is it like? Different from here. Mountains so high they scrape the sky, covered in snow even in summer, valleys green with grass, forests of pine and aspen, cold winters, but clean, fresh." He stared into the fire, seeing visions of a future not yet built. A man could raise cattle there, or horses, build something lasting. And a woman, Isabella asked softly. What could a woman build there? Ethan looked at her across the fire. Anything she wanted. It's new country, making its own rules. I've heard of women running businesses, owning land, even serving as mayors in some of the mining towns. And would such a woman, would she need to be married to be respectable? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. They had been traveling as employer and employee, maintaining careful distance despite what had passed between them in the previous cave. But now, with the storm sealing them away from the world, pretense seemed foolish. Isabella, Ethan began carefully. What happened before, when we kissed? You regret it? Her voice was steady, but he saw her hands clench in the blanket. No, God, no. He moved around the fire to sit beside her. But I need you to understand, I can't offer you what Brennan promised. A fine house, pretty dresses, an easy life. Brennan promised those things and died before I arrived, Isabella pointed out. His promises were worth nothing. What I can offer, Ethan continued, taking her hand, is partnership, protection, respect. A man who'll stand beside you, not in front of you. Who'll teach you to shoot and ranch and read the weather. Who'll never raise a hand to you except in gentleness. Isabella turned his hand over in hers, tracing the calluses and scars. And love? She asked quietly. Can you offer that? He paused, searching for truth. I think I already have. Started to. Anyway, when you grabbed my arm in that alley, When you stood up to Morrison. When you left me trail markers even though you were terrified. He lifted her hand to his lips. When you trusted me to come for you. I did trust that, she whispered. Even when Rojas held the knife to my throat, I thought, Ethan will come. And you did. Always, he said roughly. I'll always come for you. This kiss was different from the first, less tentative, more sure. Isabella's arms came up around his neck, and Ethan pulled her closer, mindful still of her healing bruises. The storm outside seemed to echo the storm within, all thunder and lightning and sweet, dangerous possibility. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Isabella's eyes were bright with tears and something else. Hope, perhaps, or joy. Is this real? She asked. Or are we just two lonely people taking shelter from storms? Does it matter? Ethan asked, then shook his head. No, that's not right. It matters. You matter. He cupped her face gently. This is real as anything I've ever felt. But I need you to be sure. You've been through so much, lost so much. I don't want to be another mistake, another man who failed you. Isabella was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she spoke, her voice strong and clear. You are not a mistake, Ethan Cole. You are the answer to prayers I didn't even know I was praying. When I begged you to take me before sunrise, I thought I was asking only to survive the night. But perhaps God heard what my heart truly needed. Not just survival, but someone to help me live again. The fire crackled and sparked, sending shadows dancing on the cave walls. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, but neither of them minded. They talked deep into the night, sharing dreams this time instead of nightmares. I want to build a house, Ethan said, with my own hands. Big kitchen for you, with a proper stove. Windows facing east so you can see the sunrise. I want a garden, Isabella added. Vegetables, but also flowers. Roses, perhaps, like my mother grew, and children playing in the yard. The last words hung in the air, delicate and daring. Ethan's hand tightened on hers. Children, he repeated softly. You want children. Someday, when we are settled, when it is safe. She looked at him uncertainly. Is that, would you want? Yes, he said simply. With you, yes. They made plans as the night wore on, building dreams with words as they would later build a home with logs and stone, a ranch in Colorado, horses, maybe cattle, a school for the local children where Isabella could teach, a life carved from wilderness but softened by love. We should marry, Ethan said suddenly. Properly, I mean, in a church, with witnesses. Make it official before God and man, Isabella smiled. Are you proposing, Mr. Cole? He shifted to face her fully, taking both her hands. I suppose I am. Isabella Martinez, will you marry me? Not because you need protection or respectability, but because I love you and want to spend my life showing you how much. Even though I came here to marry another man? Even though I bring nothing but the clothes on my back? You bring yourself, Ethan said firmly. Your strength, your courage, your terrible cooking that's getting better every day. That earned him a laugh. Your smile, rare as it is. Your trust, which I'll spend a lifetime earning. That's dowry enough for any man. Then yes, Isabella said, tears flowing freely now. Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Cole. Though I should warn you, I still cannot make proper biscuits. I'll teach you, he promised, pulling her close. We'll teach each other. They held each other as the storm finally began to pass, leaving only the soft patter of rain and distant rumbles of thunder. The fire burned low, but neither moved to tend it, content in each other's warmth. I love you, Isabella whispered against his chest. I did not think I would ever say those words again. But I love you, and I love you, Ethan replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. My brave Isabella, who faced down bandits and sheriffs and still had courage left to love again. As dawn approached, bringing with it clearing skies and the promise of fair weather, they finally dozed, still wrapped in each other's arms. The horses stamped and snorted in their corner. The fire died to embers, and the world outside prepared to welcome a new day. But in the cave, two people who had found each other through tragedy and trial slept peacefully, no longer alone, no longer afraid. They had survived the worst life could offer and discovered that sometimes, from the ashes of old dreams, new and better ones could grow. When they woke to sunlight streaming through the cave mouth, they would pack up and continue their journey north. But they would ride together now, truly together, bound by more than circumstance or necessity. They would ride toward a future they would build with their own hands, their own hearts, their own unshakable faith in each other. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and new. And in that cleansing, Ethan and Isabella had found something precious. Not just love, but the courage to embrace it fully, without reservation or fear. As Ethan stirred, Isabella pressed closer, murmuring in Spanish, endearments he was beginning to understand. He smiled, thinking how far they'd come from that desperate night in Dust Rock, when a frightened woman in a ruined wedding dress had begged for help from a stranger. Now they were no longer strangers, no longer merely survivor and protector. They were partners, lovers, soon to be husband and wife. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but they would travel it together, come what may. "Ready for Colorado?" Ethan whispered as Isabella's eyes fluttered open. "With you?" She smiled, the expression transforming her face. "I am ready for anything." And in that moment, watching the morning sun paint her face in gold, Ethan knew it was true. Together. They were ready for anything the frontier could throw at them. Together. They were finally, truly home. The Colorado Territory welcomed them with crisp mountain air and endless sky. After 2 weeks of hard travel, they'd reached Cedar Ridge, a growing town nestled in a valley between pine-covered peaks. Unlike Dust Rock's hostility, Cedar Ridge buzzed with the energy of new beginnings. Miners, ranchers, merchants, and families all building something fresh from wilderness. "That's the courthouse." Ethan pointed to a sturdy brick building. "We can get married there, if you're willing." "I know it's not a church." "It is perfect," Isabella interrupted, squeezing his hand. "God will hear our vows wherever we speak them." But their plans for a quiet ceremony were interrupted the moment they entered town. Sheriff Ben Hawkins, a barrel-chested man with kind eyes, recognized Ethan immediately. "Cole? Ethan Cole from Dust Rock?" He pumped Ethan's hand enthusiastically. "Heard about you, the deputy who stood up to corruption. We could use a man like you here." Within hours, word had spread. The town council convened an emergency meeting, and by evening, Ethan had been offered the position of sheriff. The pay was modest, but came with a small house on the edge of town, and the respect of people eager for honest law enforcement. "What do you think?" Ethan asked Isabella privately. "It means staying put, building that life we talked about. I think," Isabella said slowly, "that Cedar Ridge needs you, and I need a home." She smiled. "Our home." The wedding took place 3 days later in the Methodist church, with half the town in attendance. Isabella wore a simple blue dress donated by the minister's wife, and Ethan had managed to find a clean shirt without bullet holes. It wasn't the grand affair Isabella had once imagined, but as she walked down the aisle toward Ethan, she knew it was exactly right. "Do you, Isabella Martinez, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Reverend Thompson asked. "I do," she said clearly, her eyes never leaving Ethan's face. "Do you, Ethan Cole, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Then, by the power vested in me by God and the Colorado Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." The celebration that followed filled the churchyard. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by townspeople eager to welcome the new couple. Isabella found herself embraced by the community in a way Dust Rock had never allowed. "We need a school teacher," Mrs. Hawkins, the sheriff's wife, confided. "Someone who can handle both English and Spanish-speaking children. Would you consider it?" Isabella's eyes brightened. "I would be honored." A year later, their small house had become a real home. Isabella's garden bloomed with vegetables and flowers. including roses grown from cuttings Mrs. Hawkins had shared. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread. Isabella had finally mastered biscuits, and the parlor held books in both English and Spanish for her students. Ethan had settled into his role as sheriff with the same steady competence he brought to everything. Crime was minimal in Cedar Ridge, mostly drunk minors and occasional claim disputes. He'd hired 2 deputies he could trust, allowing him to spend evenings at home instead of constantly patrolling. It was on one such evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, that Isabella shared her news. "I saw Doc Morrison today," she said carefully, watching Ethan's face. He tensed immediately. "Are you ill? What's wrong?" "Nothing is wrong." She took his hand, placing it on her still flat belly. "Everything is right. We are going to have a baby." Ethan stared at her, then at his hand, then back at her face. A baby. By Christmas, the doctor thinks. She bit her lip anxiously. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "Isabella, there aren't words." He set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "A baby. Our baby. Our baby." She agreed, laughing and crying at once. The pregnancy progressed well, though Ethan treated Isabella like spun glass, much to her amused frustration. The entire town seemed invested in the coming child. Her students brought small gifts. The church ladies knitted enough blankets for 10 babies, and even the rough miners tipped their hats respectfully when she passed. Snow was falling softly on Christmas Eve when the pains began. Ethan paced the parlor like a caged wolf while Doc Morrison and Mrs. Hawkins tended Isabella upstairs. Her cries tore at him, each one a reminder of another night, another woman, another loss he couldn't prevent. "She's strong," Reverend Thompson said, having come to wait with him. "Have faith." Just as dawn broke on Christmas morning, a new cry split the air, high, indignant, gloriously alive. Ethan was up the stairs before anyone could stop him, bursting into the bedroom to find Isabella exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle. "Come meet your son," she said softly. "A son?" Ethan approached slowly, as if in a dream. The baby was perfect. Dark hair like his mother, gray eyes that would likely darken, tiny fists waving in protest at this bright new world. "What shall we call him?" Isabella asked. Ethan thought of all they'd overcome, all they'd built from ashes and determination. "Samuel," he said finally. "Samuel Miguel Cole, for new beginnings and honored memories." 3 years passed in a blur of first steps, first words, and the controlled chaos of a household with a young child. Isabella's school thrived, and she'd added evening classes for adults who wanted to learn English or improve their reading. Ethan's reputation as a fair but firm lawman had spread, bringing stability to the entire valley. It was a Sunday afternoon when the past came calling one last time. A wagon rolled into town, travel-worn and dusty. From it stepped an elderly Mexican woman, her face weathered but her posture proud. Isabella was in the garden with Samuel, teaching him the names of flowers in Spanish. When the woman appeared at their gate, "Disculpe, señora," the woman called. "I am looking for Isabella Martinez." Isabella stood slowly, something in the woman's voice stirring memory. "I am Isabella Cole now. How can I help you?" The woman's face crumpled. "Dios mío, it is you, child. I am your tia Rosa, your mother's sister. I have been searching for 3 years, ever since I heard—" She stopped, overcome with emotion. Isabella stood frozen as memories flooded back. Tia Rosa, who lived far to the south, who'd sent letters and dried fruit at Christmas. Alive, family, alive. "Tia?" she whispered, then rushed to embrace her aunt. "How? I thought everyone—" "I was visiting my daughter in Mexico City when—" Rosa couldn't finish. "When I returned and found, I looked for you, but you had vanished. Then last month, a trader mentioned a schoolteacher named Isabella in Colorado, who spoke of a ranch, of lost family. They cried together in the garden while Samuel watched with wide eyes and Ethan stood protectively nearby. Later, over coffee and Isabella's famous biscuits. Rosa told her story, how she'd saved what she could from the ranch, how she'd never given up hope of finding her niece. "I brought something," Rosa said, producing a worn leather pouch. Inside were photographs. Isabella's parents on their wedding day, her brothers grinning at the camera, the whole family together at Christmas. "I saved what I could." Isabella touched the images with shaking fingers. "My family," she breathed. "Ethan, look, this is them. This is who they were." That night, as Rosa slept in their guest room and Samuel dreamed in his small bed, Ethan and Isabella stood in their bedroom looking out at the stars. "She wants us to visit Mexico, to see where she lives," Isabella said. "She has a small house, some land. She's alone now. Her daughter died last year. We could bring her here." Ethan suggested, "Build another room. Samuel should know his great-aunt, and you should have your family close." Isabella turned in his arms. "You would do that?" "Isabella, you gave up everything for a new life. You've built our home, taught our town's children, given me a son and more happiness than I thought possible. Of course we'll make room for your aunt. Our home," she corrected. "Our town, our son, our life, built together." They stood in comfortable silence, each thinking how far they'd traveled from that desperate night in Dust Rock. The woman in the faded wedding dress and the weary deputy had transformed into something neither had dared imagine. A family, rooted deep in community and love. "Do you ever think about it?" Isabella asked. "How different life might have been if Thomas Brennan had lived?" "No," Ethan said firmly, "because then I wouldn't have you, wouldn't have Samuel, wouldn't have this life we've built. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes." Isabella reached up to touch the thin scar on his cheek, a permanent reminder of the day he'd faced down 8 men for her. "No regrets?" "Only one," he said, catching her hand and kissing it. "That I didn't find you sooner." A year later, the house had indeed grown to accommodate Tia Rosa, who filled it with the sense of traditional cooking and the sound of Spanish lullabies. Samuel toddled between 3 adults who adored him, switching languages with the fluid ease of childhood. Isabella sat at her desk, writing in the journal Ethan had given her for Christmas. She'd filled pages with memories. Her families, their courtship, Samuel's first years. Now she wrote, "Today marks 5 years since I stepped off that stagecoach in Dust Rock, wearing a wedding dress meant for a dead man. 5 years since I begged a stranger to save me before sunrise. That woman, desperate, alone, broken by loss, seems like someone from another life. I am Isabella Cole now, wife to the best man I've ever known, mother to a son who carries both our heritage forward, teacher to children eager to learn, niece to an aunt who proves family can be recovered even from ash. I am rooted in this place, this life, this love. The sunrise I once feared has become my favorite time of day. Each dawn brings new mercies, new possibilities. I watch it from my kitchen window while making breakfast for my family. And I thank God for the winding path that led me home. For I am home now, truly home, in ways that mail-order bride could never have imagined. Not in the house I expected or with the man I thought I'd marry, but exactly where I belong. Sometimes the most desperate prayers are answered in ways we never expect. Sometimes saying, "Take me before sunrise," leads not to ending but to beginning. Sometimes a chance encounter in an alley becomes a love story for the ages. This is my story. This is our story. And it is far from over. Isabella set down her pen and joined her family in the parlor, where Ethan was attempting to teach Samuel to whistle while Rosa laughed at their efforts. Outside, the Colorado mountains stood eternal, guardians of this small paradise carved from wilderness and watered with tears that had transformed into joy. The woman who'd once begged for survival had found so much more. Life abundant, love overflowing, hope restored. And as she settled into Ethan's embrace, watching their son giggle at his father's funny faces, Isabella knew that every hard mile, every moment of fear, every tear she'd had been worth it to arrive at this moment, this life, this love that would last until her final sunrise and beyond. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the Wild West. I hope Isabella and Ethan's story touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening to this story from? I'd love to hear from listeners around the world. Please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Did you see Isabella and Ethan's love coming? What was your favorite moment? Your feedback means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more authentic Western romance tales. Until next time, partners.